This is a jury box. In a regular court setting, this would be filled with people. All 12 of these people will have one thing in common. They all hate truck drivers. They are going to have a chance to get even with the guy that was following 1 foot off their bumper with shark's teeth on the grill of his truck that scared them to death. It doesn't make any difference to them that it wasn't this particular truck driver. What makes a difference to them is this is their chance to get even. Negligent retention is all about record keeping. It's all about being able to prove that you have actually done the remedial training that is necessary if your driver has done something that might be construed as making him an unsafe driver. If your driver gets a moving violation in a commercial vehicle and he is convicted, you must put him through remedial training, and you must train him for the same infraction that he committed. You cannot give him remedial training for following too close when the ticket was for speeding. The training has to match the infraction. If your driver has a very bad accident, somebody's maimed for life or killed, an opposing attorney is going to ask for several things. First off, the hours of service record. They will automatically assume that your driver was illegal and should not have been there. They're going to ask for motor vehicle reports. They're going to ask for all of his disciplinary records, and they're going to ask for records of your company policy. If your company policy says that you cannot hire somebody that has more than 2 tickets, and then one of your driver gets convicted of the 3rd ticket, you must follow the same policy for keeping them on the road as you had for putting them on the road in the first place. Remember, you are responsible for continuous safety training. If you cannot prove an ongoing safety training program in court, you can be liable for punitive damages in the millions of dollars. That means that you have to have training that is in writing, it's been signed by the driver, it is dated, and you can find it. Because if it doesn't have those things, as far as the court is concerned, it simply did not happen. If company policy is violated, you must have records of the disciplinary activity that you engaged in with the driver. If your driver has a very bad accident where somebody is maimed for life or someone is killed, the opposing attorney is automatically going to assume that there's something in your driver's background that made him unsafe to be on the road, and he's going to try to prove that. So you have to have records that show that your driver was disciplined for any company policies that he broke, he was retrained properly, and you have to be able to prove that. And to prove it, remember, it has to be in writing, it has to be dated, it has to be signed by the driver, and it must be legible and clear, and you have to be able to find it. If it's not dated, if it's not signed, and if it's not in writing, it simply did not happen. There are several things that you need to understand about remedial training that most people either ignore or don't know in the first place. Let me explain it to you. If your driver gets a ticket for reckless driving, you must terminate him. If you put him back on the road when he is proven that he is a reckless driver and he has a bad accident, there is nothing that you can do to avoid punitive damages because you knowingly put a reckless driver on the road. Number 2 is a speeding ticket. If your driver is convicted of a speeding ticket in his personal vehicle or in a commercial vehicle, you must retrain that driver. You can't put him back on the road until after he's been through remedial training so that he knows the proper way to handle a vehicle and not speed. Lane change violations. You must provide proof of remedial training for a lane change violation. And again, you have to be able to find it. You have to prove in court that he was retrained after he had that ticket. If one of your drivers has a preventable crash, you must be able to prove that you retrained that driver so he can prevent doing the same thing again to cause the same type of crash. You must demand remedial training for any logbook violation. This is so important. For many years, people have gotten away with cheating on their logs or turning in false logs. That's a thing of the past. It doesn't work anymore. They are even putting managers of companies in jail now because they should have known the drivers were falsifying their logs. You must, at the end of the training, give the driver a test or an examination to prove that he understood the training. And he must answer all of the questions correctly. Because if you go to court and he has missed 1 or 2 or 3 questions on the test from the training, all the court is going to do is say, well, he proved he did not understand the training, and then you put him back on the road. If he doesn't answer all the questions correctly, he has to go through the training again, take the test again, and then answer them all correctly. If it takes 5 times or 10 times, he has to do it 5 or 10 times. And if he cannot be successfully retrained, you must terminate him for your company's sake and for your own sake. The most important part of remedial training is accurate record keeping. Remember, if you cannot find it, it did not happen. Piles of stuff on your desk that should be filed are going to be difficult to go through in case you have a bad accident. Do it right the first time. A prominent truck accident attorney recently settled a case for millions of dollars because the people that were sued could not prove that they had adequately trained their drivers. They could not prove that they had ever done tractor-trailer training to the people that they hired. They also could not prove that they had done continual training classes. As a safety manager, you must be sure that your drivers go through safety training on a continuous basis. You never stop training them. Now, a good rule of thumb is each driver has to, whether it's in training classes or written material or DVDs or videos, whatever you choose to use, each driver has to have about 16 hours worth of ongoing safety training every year. If you cannot prove it, it did not happen. Also in this case, it was proven that the defendants were careless and negligent in trusting the tractor-trailer to the driver in the first place, because the driver had more speeding tickets than their policy would allow to hire a new driver to go on the road. Remember, if you have a policy for hiring your drivers, and that policy states the driver cannot have more than 2 tickets to come to work for you, your drivers that are working for you cannot have more than 2 tickets and stay working for you. Otherwise, you're going to wind up paying millions of dollars in punitive damages should you have that bad accident. You must be able to prove that the defendant was trusted and deserved to be trusted by your safety department. Prior reckless behavior is a sign of inexperience or lack of training or habitual recklessness. So if he has reckless behavior at the time of the accident, they're going to search everything they can find to see if they can find one thing that you didn't do right, that they can try to get a settlement of several $1,000,000 more than would be normal. Remember, most of the time, people prefer to settle out of court rather than to face this jury of people that are waiting to get even with the truck driver. The slide that you're going to look at in a minute, the driver of the truck wanted to make sure that the delivery was there on time. The driver of the truck had some personal business before he got in the truck, and he'd only had about 5 hours of sleep in the previous 24 hours before he came to work. The driver of the truck stayed behind the wheel. The driver of a truck couldn't really stay awake. He kept nodding at the wheel and eventually slammed into the back of a line of stopped cars. The company settled out of court. Now, this was not a judgment that could be appealed. This is what the company actually paid, $64 million, because they could not prove in court that they had trained that driver to get off the road when he was tired. He did not have adequate training about how to recognize being tired behind the wheel, how to recognize being unsafe because of lack of sleep, and the necessity to find a safe place to park and get off the road. $64 million because they could not prove that they had adequately trained the driver. It was oral training, it was not in writing, it was not signed, and it was not dated. It did not happen. $64 million worth of did not happen. This DVD is to remind you of the immense responsibility that you have as a safety manager. You are the first line of defense and sometimes the last line of defense that your company has to prevent punitive damages. Sometimes punitive damages can destroy a company because it will be in excess of what the insurance is for the company. Make sure that if something happens, you're prepared so that your company will thank you for what you've done rather than discharge you for what you didn't do.